Hello, everyone. I'm Seth Hopkins, coming to you live from my house because we can't be at the Booth Western Art Museum like we wish we could, especially with all these lovely ladies with us. We were supposed to have an opening for the exhibition Jackson Hole 5, Important Painters from the West, but some other things got in the way and it didn't happen. So we're bringing them to you from Jackson Hole and letting you have a virtual opportunity to hear them talk about their work, to see a little bit of the exhibition, and to hear them talk about a few pieces in the show. So that hopefully someday soon, we'll all be able to meet back at the museum and see the show, and you'll be ready to know a little bit more about it and have met the people behind the artwork. So if we could, let's bring up the walkthrough of the exhibition and let people see what that looks like. And so this is the outside of the exhibition gallery. Jackson Hole 5, Important Painters from the West, and one peach from each of the artists is there on the outside wall. And this is part of a virtual walkthrough tour that some friends of ours did for us, and go ahead and hit play on that. And you start out here with one piece from each of the artists, and then goes on inside and kind of spins you around, lets you see all the wonderful artwork. And I wanted to give a shout out to the sponsors of the exhibition, Ameris Bank, Jim Miller, and radio station WBHF 1450 and FM 100 right here in Cartersville. We really appreciate all those folks who helped make this possible and are continuing to make it accessible through this virtual online version. Jim Miller, some of the ladies may remember, came with me 2 summers ago to Jackson Hole when we first started putting this exhibition together, and met these talented artists and really fell in love with their work. And when we talked about doing this exhibition, he jumped in with both feet. And so both he and the bank, Ameris Bank, made contributions to help defray some of the expenses on the exhibition. As we're spinning around, it's going fairly quickly, but I just want to give you a real quick overview of what the gallery looks like, how beautifully hung and lit it was, and what a great job our curatorial department did. And what a regret we have that everybody's not seeing it that way. But this is the next best thing we can do. There are a couple of quotes that we put up on the walls in the exhibition, and I think this one on this wall right here is my favorite. You can't see it, but when you go back in to this exhibition, we'll be having a link out there that you can go in at your own pace and spin around and look at whatever you want. But the quote on that wall says, "The only thing that matches the beauty of our mountains in Wyoming is the grit of our people." And that's been attributed to Liz Cheney. And I just love that quote. I think it's so cool. And I'm going to let our artists weigh in on that in a moment. But this exhibition features 5 great artists, 5 important artists from the West. They just happen to be women. We didn't set out with that as a goal necessarily. We wanted to do a show based on Jackson Hole. And these were 5 great artists that we thought went together and that their work really plays well together, so to speak. And so they got selected to be in the exhibition. And right there's a shot of the 5 of them. And that's the intro panel when you come into the gallery, and we'll end right there with our little quick tour around the gallery. And again, there will be a link out there that you can find where you can go in yourself and walk around in the gallery and look up, down, left, right, and see the artwork at your own pace and look at what pieces you want to look at. And there aren't any you're not going to want to look at, so that makes it easy. And many of the works are also for sale, and some of these artists could use some help, I'm sure, right about now and in the coming weeks and months. It's going to be a tough go for a lot of craftspeople and artisans and artists and people in the music business and elsewhere. So think about helping them out a little bit if you can, okay? All right, so let's start at the beginning, and let's have each of our artists walk us through kind of where they came from and how did they get to Jackson Hole and why art. So if we could start with September, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everybody. Let's see. I will start off just to say that exhibit looks incredible, and I'm so sad that we all aren't there to enjoy it. And what an honor it is to be at your incredible museum, Seth. Thank you. And and so all these incredible ladies, I mean, the women or artists, I should say, the artwork is incredible. So I'm just excited to be here. My background is that I grew up on a ranch in Nevada, surrounded by open spaces, nature, quiet. And so I think that instilled, a sense of, it definitely is reflected in my art. I think in regards to my palette and a focus on negative space and sort of a sense of capturing a moment in time and essence. And I think you have to really quiet your world down to see those moments and be able to capture them and express them. So I think Nevada and just quiet, open spaces connected me to nature. So that's where I'm from. And do you want me to go on to the next question, Seth? Or are we going on to?
Yeah. Let's talk about art. How'd you get into art? And we'll come back to the Jackson Hole question.
Okay, great. So in regards to art, I grew up in a family of artists, and so grew up surrounded by paintings and sculpture and a focus on the arts and a lot of discussion about art and architecture. And architecture and art are actually pretty inextricably linked. So my background is in architecture, and in college I painted a lot, and a lot of the attributes of architecture translate really well into paintings. So art was sort of a segue from my family and from architecture. And I hate to say genetics because I'm not really sure that genetics play a part, but just by coincidence, I do have a lot of genetics that kind of focus towards the arts as far as my family, as a whole. So,
well, your great grandfather made one of the greatest pieces in American art history, right?
Yes, yeah, that was Gutzon Borglum, and he did Mount Rushmore and some incredible paintings and sculptures that he's less known for. So, yeah.
Cool. That's pretty good lineage.
Yeah, it does seem like it's very natural. Making art is very natural. It's not something I have to work hard. Well, that's not true. I focus and put a lot of time in, but it's very intuitive, put it that way.
Not easy, intuitive. That's a better word for sure. And, in the 2 generations in between Borglum and you, were there other artists we would have heard of or at least made their living doing art?
Nobody that really focused on it as a profession, but my grandfather, who's an architect, painted, and my father painted, and then my mother, who's not on the Borglum side, she was a painter. So not professionally, but definitely experientially. Yeah. Okay.
All right, let's jump down to Amy Ringholz. Same question.
All right, well, I was raised by 2 teachers, and my father is an artist. So the combination kind of all came together, and I was interested in how Dad could make such amazing things come out of the end of his paintbrush and pen tip through my childhood. So I thought that like making art was like making magic. So went on through school and got a degree in art and art education, and then began teaching in Ohio, which is where I'm from. But deep down, I knew that I really wanted to go out west, go where my heart felt the most free and alive with the drama of the animals and the scenery. And so around 25, I came and worked on a dude ranch in Jackson Hole. And over that summer, I sold to the guests, and it kind of launched my career. And I absolutely fell in love with this little teeny town with the most amazing grouping of artists and in the most amazing surroundings. So I think of myself as kind of being a little kid from Ohio. I've never heard of an artist that actually made it and made a living on it with a giant dream to go after it and see how far I could get. And so the two all kind of work together, and I've been here now for almost 18 years.
Cool. One of our members actually claims to have bought your first piece when they were there at the Dude Ranch, Hank Bauer.
Yeah, Hank Bauer was one of them. Yes.
So was it the first or one of the first?
It was one of the first of that summer.
Okay.
Yes.
And so you were slinging chow or cleaning up after the horses, or?
I was a housekeeper by morning, and then I would get to ride the horses in the afternoon, and I'd paint all evening.
Okay.
And it was just an amazing kind of beyond what I could have ever expected to happen experience.
So that's cool that the people staying there that summer got to buy the early pieces and help launch your career.
They did.
Okay. Amy Lay has joined us. Hooray!
Yay!
Had a few little internet problems out there, but she's with us now.
Yeah.
And Amy, we're going to throw you right in the fire.
Okay.
Say, tell us about where you grew up and how that may have influenced getting into art, or how you wound up getting into art.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I grew up on a little ranch in Northeast Oregon. It was pretty remote, and so most of my time I was alone, and I had 3 brothers and a bunch of uncles and my mom. So she got me into drawing, and nature was kind of all around us all the time. It still is here. And so that was my voice, was drawing. And it still is. I wasn't much of a reader. It was the hobby. So I fell in love with that, and I fell in love with nature, and that's how I started.
Okay. And any formal training in there anywhere?
Yeah, I got an art degree from Eastern Oregon University. And then I waited out, probably 6 years before I went professional. And in that time, I taught high school social studies and worked for the Forest Service and fought fire and reforestation. So I was out in the woods a lot. And I still just drew that whole time until I decided to try to be a professional.
So you were a school teacher and a badass at the same time.
I tried to be. No, it was fun. I'm really grateful for those other careers. It taught me a lot.
Well, speaking of that, I know somebody who's had a lot of careers is Kathy Withfler. And she's done a lot of things in her life. And so Kathy, tell us a brief version of your circuitous tale to becoming a successful artist.
Yes. Well, in 2nd grade, we were studying where milk came from, and we all had to draw a cow. And my cow was deemed the best one by the teacher and the classmates, and it was hung on the wall for parent-teacher night. I was extremely shy as a kid, and so for that to happen set my goal to be an artist. And somehow I've managed to keep that dream alive all these years. I came to Jackson with a surgical tech career from a trade school, lived in Idaho Falls for a year doing that, and then moved to Jackson with a portable easel to learn to paint outdoors. And that was in 1980. I was able to run into some great mentors, a couple of which lived here, John Clymer, Conrad Schwaring, and my one-on-one mentor was Greg McCuron, who had painted a lot with Conrad. And then through the years, my early years here in the 80s, I met some other artists that became my mentors. And it was a lot of outdoor work, not only behind the easel, but also part-time jobs, helping ranchers do everything from fencing to cowboying, to dragging meadows, to putting up hay, and other various part-time jobs to support myself.
So anything you could do to keep being able to buy the supplies to keep painting, right?
Exactly. And somehow I learned that when my rent came due and I maybe didn't quite have enough money, someone would either buy a small painting or offer me a job for 2 weeks. So I learned to trust that as far as paying my way. It worked out good.
Cool. Okay, and Catherine Mapes Turner, I think you're the only native in the group, but those are pretty rare things, natives of Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So it's not unusual that would be the case, right?
Yeah, and I can't take credit for that. That was just dumb luck. In fact, I feel like I've had more than my share of dumb luck that got me to here.
And I'll use plenty of that.
I'll take it. First being, my first stroke of good fortune was being born here in Jackson Hole, born and raised as part of fourth generation ranching family. My family came west with the pioneers, with the Mormon pioneers, and eventually settled in the north end of Teton County and built a ranch. It's still in existence inside of now what is Grand Teton National Park. It's a dude ranch. We have about 80 guests a week. But being located there in the middle of the park is incredibly special. So my dad was born and raised on the ranch, and he was and still is a zoologist and a biologist, and he raised us in a way that was very closely connected to the natural world. In fact, he always had really crazy pets. I mean, he'd bring home all kinds of birds and orphaned elk at one point we had as a pet. We had eagles in the backyard that he was rehabilitating all the time. He had snakes. He had one point a coyote that got hit on the highway that we were rehabilitating. So I thought every kid had those kind of wild animals in their house and in the backyard. And it just really instilled a deep, deep love for where we were all being raised and the animals that surrounded us. We also have 250 horses and mules, and that was very special. And I was a horse girl, I was a 4-H girl. I grew up riding from as long as I can remember, like September, and maybe Kathy. I grew up and went on to school. I went away to school, which was a good experience, and then came back and had another stroke of great fortune, and that was to meet painters, world-class painters that were painting in Jackson at the time. And they took me under their wing. And they would take me painting because they saw how thirsty I was, what a sponge I was. And one of the people that took me painting was Kathy Withfler. And she, I'm so grateful to her for the way she showed me the ropes of plein air painting, because it's there's so much involved in plein air painting, and it's really, and it's such a blessing to have someone sort of lead the way. And I got shown that really early. I was a high school student when I first started going out plein air painting with Skip Whitcomb and Ned Jacob and Kathy and Tim Lawson. And so I was a really eager young person who wanted to learn everything that they could about art. And I had very generous teachers at the time.
Well, that's really wonderful story. And it is a great thing that happens in the art world when other artists pay it forward or pay it back, or whatever the appropriate term would be, to the younger ones coming up and showing them the ropes. And Kathy Withfler, I think you are kind of the, I don't know, I see you as the trailblazer or the matriarch of this group a little bit. And if you hadn't been out there slugging away doing those odd jobs and paving the way for women artists to be in the market there in Jackson, I think it might be a different place today. Anybody have a thought about that? Raise your hand.
I hadn't really thought about that, but to me, painting is somewhat, quite genderless.
Right.
But it wasn't real common to see a gal out painting by the side of the road like I did constantly for years. And I've spent more time as a more mature painter in the studio, of which I have a nice one in our house that Larry built with us. But the experiences of being outside also helped me to meet local people, because they would stop by and wonder what in the heck I was doing.
I was going to ask you if you had any good stories about that.
Yes, I do. I usually have a dog with me, both of which have now gone on to the rainbow heaven. But the couple of times that my dogs would be nervous when someone came up, made me quite wary of, no painting is worth having trouble over, so I would just throw everything in the pickup and leave. But I had some wonderful experiences and actually made some lifelong friends. People that were interested in what I was doing would stop by. And also part-time jobs would come up. So that helped.
You're doing a great job painting that mountain. How about doing my house?
Absolutely. I charge by the square inch.
That's good when you're doing a whole house.
I have painted houses for money.
Well, that's nothing to be ashamed of.
No.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that before we move on? Okay. September, back to you. Talk a little bit about what it is that makes Jackson Hole unique and why you love living there, and how it affects your creativity and shows up in your artwork, that sense of place.
That's a great question. I think, like a lot of people in Jackson, I like to say I came for a season, and then Jackson would not let me leave. So I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with the nature and this mountain. I spent a lot of time skiing on the mountain, and the people and the artists here, the community that supports the arts, and the people here love nature. And so I had a resonance with this community in that respect. And then I like what Liz Cheney said about grit. Like, people here, it's a tough place to come and make it, and you have to have a certain sense of fortitude, I think. So it was the people and then the nature, and I spent a lot of time in the mountains and started painting. I was working full-time as an architect, but was painting more than I had anticipated, and then painting took over my life, and I ended up quitting my architecture job and painting full-time. So it's almost like I just got so compelled to paint by what I was seeing every day that it sort of took over. So that's how I made the transition, and why Jackson just became a place that I now call home, which is an honor. Yeah.
I can see that. It is one of the most gorgeous places on the face of the earth. And Amy Lay, you probably have spent the least time there of the 5 artists. And what is it that brought you? And then were there's some things that maybe got in the way a little bit of making art and being creative?
Yeah, I would say for me, Jackson Hole, I saw that early in my career as a goal. It was like this golden place on a hill that I wanted to get to because of, at the time, it was because of the galleries and the museum and the art culture. And so I guess it's a little different for me, because I think a lot of people go to Jackson and they think of, oh, I've gone to the mountains, I've gone to the Old West, I've gone to nature. And that's actually where I was coming from, was the Old West and nature. And so when I went to Jackson, I felt like I had landed in a very classy, cultured, metropolitan city. And it taught me so much. I learned how to, I guess, move in the art world and move with other artists, and people were kind to me. And, I became a little more cultured. But when I did it, I was a single mother with 3 kids, and it was hard. And I also left behind a ranch with 1,000 acres that always haunted me. And so now that the kids have been raised, I've come back to the ranch, but Jackson is still, for me, it's one of my hometowns. And it also taught me, I think the most important thing Jackson Hole taught me is, coming from Oregon, remote Eastern Oregon, I learned that you can go somewhere and you can share these big spaces with lots of people instead of putting up fences. And I became more of a conservation minded person. And I think I can take what Jackson taught me and bring it back to this Wild West place and help it out a little bit. So I'm very grateful for Jackson. And it's still kind of home to me too. So.
Absolutely. But that area where you grew up is much more rolling hills, I was asking you before about the influence of the Palouse area.
Right.
It's very different, isn't it?
Well, it's a little bit lower, but we're right near Hell's Canyon. It's the Eagle Cap Wilderness, Chief Joseph area. So it's very similar, actually. It's super rugged, sagebrush and forest. We just don't really have the aspen, and it's not quite as high. But, our nearest neighbor, we can't see. We're 25 miles from a little tiny town. So it's way more remote than a lot there.
So Jackson Hole, with a population of, I don't know, what is it, 15, 20,000 people, was too big,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, but I miss it. I miss it, but I love the ranch here. And this is where I don't know, I connect with this place a lot.
Great. Amy Ringholz, you talked a little bit about coming to Jackson for the Dude Ranch job and consciously wanting to stay and do art. What is your thoughts about what Amy was just saying about there is a lot going on there? There is a lot of new money coming in, and there's a lot of old money that was already there. It is a very interesting town to be in the middle of this wilderness area and have such an impressive and unbelievable natural feature like the Tetons there. It makes for a really interesting mix, doesn't it?
Yeah. My favorite part about Jackson Hole is the juxtaposition in which it is that when you fly in or out of here, you can look around and say, I will never see every one of these lakes, streams, valleys, forests if I lived here my entire life, which makes it feel like such a amazing wild playground of beauty. But then on the other hand, this little tiny town has so many amazing resources for being in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming. And how can you have these amazing museums, these amazing musicians come through town, very high quality artists, as well as sophisticated buyers and art lovers in the middle of nowhere? And so I felt like it just really enveloped my love of, I love the people of Jackson Hole, and the support that they give us for our art here is unbelievable. All of us are involved with donating to a bunch of different causes and being so supportive to caring for our town, and in turn, this town so much cares about us. And I just love the family feeling that I have here, and I've made the best friends of my life in Jackson Hole. And so I feel beyond lucky to get to live here and to continue to keep it special and to continue adding my legacy to this place and really put your heart and soul into a little town in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming.
Now, Catherine, as a native, which we talked about on the first go round, your sense of that is probably a little bit different than the rest of these folks who got here by choice. And as you said, yours was just luck.
I've seen a lot of changes. And then I hear from my grandmother what Jackson was like when she was first building the ranch. It was a very, very different place. There wasn't a restaurant when my grandmother came to town. There wasn't a hotel she camped on the banks of Jenny Lake because there wasn't a hotel that existed in Jackson. There were no paved roads. There wasn't any grocery stores. So a lot has changed in a really condensed period of time in Jackson to get us to here. And I've often asked myself, why has a small cow town in the middle of nowhere in a state most people don't even know? Most people don't even know Wyoming, where to find it on a map. How did Jackson Hole become one of the art centers of our nation? And I have a theory, because art was here before the money was. There was always Conrad Schwerin is a great example of that. He was painting and selling his paintings on the sidewalk to nobody. At the time, there weren't art galleries when Conrad Schwerin was painting. So the art was here first. And it's argued that the money came because the art was here, because the culture was here, because the beauty was here, and some tax advantages. But Jackson Hole is now known as a micropolitan. A micropolitan is an area that has it. You have to qualify for a micropolitan. You have to have a certain amount of culture, certain amount of 4 diamond restaurants, and access to an international airport. So Jackson's a micropolitan, and the arts play a big role of that. But besides having a lot of art available, there's a lot of art makers. There's an incredible symphony. There are filmmakers, world-class dancers, photographers, musicians that come here. What is it? What's in the water here? And my theory is that it's a place of intensity that shapes us all. And that this place of intensity is always in flux. And I think that's really critical, to have things always an element of variability for creativity to thrive, to push through creativity. So the weather here is always changing. Today we might have 3 or 4 seasons. The terrain is always changing. The dynamics of the natural world are always changing. Right now we're experiencing the migration. So we have, in the next couple of weeks, thousands of elk will pass my house. And then in a month from now, you won't recognize the valley because the snow will have melted and it'll all green up. You don't have that in Florida. It's pretty much the same day in and day out. So the variability is always shaking things up inside of ourselves and making us stretch and grow and pave new pathways of thought and expression. That's my theory.
I do have to say, the first time I came out to Jackson, first couple of times, the overwhelming beauty, the natural resources, the hiking, the climbing, the biking, the rafting, all those things, I just was amazed at how much there was to do, how beautiful it was. But at the same time, the closer you got to that square, the more it felt like a little like a movie set, and that nothing was real. Am I misinterpreting that? Either Kathy?
What do you think, Kath?
Oh, I think you nailed it. When I grew up in a very rural area, it took us an hour to get to the town with our high school. And so one of the reasons I moved to Jackson to ply my trade as an outdoor painter was because of the scenery here in the open space, as well as the rural nature. But I never really intended to stay here because I felt the town was sort of movie set like, a little bit of unreal inhabitants in a way, especially the tourists. But I got to know a lot of the local people whose people had homesteaded here during my time doing odd jobs. And I feel very fortunate to have learned about, as Catherine talked about, how rural and poor and almost backward this little town was years ago. In my association with the people that I did odd jobs for, many of which were ranch work, because I grew up on a little ranch, and could handle myself around horses and cattle and fences and ditches and hay. I got to learn about how backward this community really was, because it was quite isolated back then, mainly because of the weather.
Catherine, is that a fair description, or you had your own little enclave out there at the ranch and stayed
The ranch
to yourselves?
was the ranch was snowed in 9 months a year, and so they didn't have access to the outside world for 9 months at a time. But my grandmother always
isolated.
That's pretty isolated. My grandmother always had an interesting relationship with the Tetons. She said that for the early pioneers, the Tetons were almost resented. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because the train was on the other side of the Tetons. Mm. So to access, and the train could, connect you to the rest of the world. And you had to somehow get over those mountains before you could get connected to the rest of the world. Because of the isolation of Jackson Hole is where there was a lot of rascals that ended up settling here, a lot of outlaws. And the early years of Jackson Hole got a reputation for that because it was a good place to hide.
So September, tell us about this piece. Very interesting.
Yeah, so this piece I chose actually two to talk about. They're very different in nature. And this painting was about capturing this really small moment in time when these two fawns were following their mother up over a fence out at my parents' ranch in Nevada. And I'm out there often photographing the mule deer. And so I watched this doe going across the alfalfa field. She got to a fence. She hopped over with no problem at all. And of course, and these two fawns just stood there. Mama was on the other side, and they were just summing up the fence, almost like, how do we do this? And it was just such a wonderful moment because they were still but poised. And anyone who's seen a deer hop over a fence, they've got springs in their bodies and they just bounce right over. But these two young ones I don't know how many times they've done it. Maybe this is the first time, I don't know. But the fence, I didn't paint the fence. I was trying to capture that moment of curiosity, and then they were poised. And it's a quiet painting, but there's actually a lot happening. And the deer behind is animated with its leg out, kind of ready to go. And they're both studying the fence. And the deer in the front hopped over, and then it was about 2 minutes. They stood there, and it felt like an eternity for me watching. But they just both hopped over like nobody's business and kept going on with their day. So that's what this painting is about.
We call that the oh crap moment, don't we?
Exactly. Like, what do we do here?
Yeah, exactly. I was in New Mexico last year and saw some deer running full speed across a prairie or a pasture or whatever it was, and they were jumping multiple fences at the top speed, and it was impressive to see. You mentioned though about seeing this scene on your parents' ranch in Nevada versus somewhere around Jackson. Is one of the things about Jackson growing that it's getting harder to find wildlife around there to use as reference and to see in the wild?
Actually, not at all. I live on Flat Creek, and there are deer going through here back and forth all the time. There was a pine marten on my deck. There are otter. Not very often, but I've seen otter every now and then. And the elk are out here in the moose. Not like Kat's place is amazing because she's right out there. I'm more in town, but I do see quite a few deer, and then I go into the park a lot. So I think that I photograph these deer at my parents' place just because I'm out there often, and there's just hundreds and hundreds of deer right there in the alfalfa field. So it's pretty handy for them. But no, there's plenty of wildlife here. The bison are if you go up into Kelly in the park, and so I carry my camera with me everywhere I go, and I go up into the park pretty often. So yeah.
Okay. And let's take a look at your second piece here.
Okay. So this piece is actually really in contrast to the prior one, and so what my thoughts were, and where the origins of this piece, and it's a larger piece. It's 33 by 48, I think, something like that. And it's inspired by my great-grandfather's sculpture that's at the National Museum of Wildlife Art, the Mares of Diomedes. And that sculpture, it's a huge sculpture, and it's 7 horses and 1 rider, and it's like a wave of horses. So, and it's based on Greek mythology. And so this piece was, it's different, but inspired by that. And that piece to me, it's like a wave of horses. And I was trying to get across this feeling of a wave almost. And I did that with the muted palette. And then the texture in the background mirrors the dapples of the horses. So I was trying to get a sense of a cohesiveness. And then there's layers too, like a wave has layers. There are actually 5 horses in this piece. There are 3 that are easy to identify, but there are 2 more. There's here in the middle and the back is a 4th horse, and then to the far right there's the shoulder of another horse. So it was a concept of layers, And then in regards to this concept of a wave, I was thinking of power, and these horses, I was focused a lot on the musculature and their flared nostrils, and then how I cropped it. The composition has a sense of them coming kind of through the frame. So those are a lot of elements that came together in this painting. So.
And tell me about the media in these two and the range of media that you work in, and how do you decide which one to work in on a daily basis?
That's a good question.
That's the only kind I ask.
What's that? Yeah.
That's the only kind I ask.
Great questions. So this is an oil painting on Belgian linen. And so I paint in charcoal, or draw in charcoal, paint in oils and watercolors. And that's a good question. I think I love the charcoal because it's so immediate. And then the oil just has so many more nuances with the color and the different mediums you can use to get effects that you're looking for with oil painting. So,
well, you mentioned the charcoal, and there's a very dramatic one in the exhibition. And if people go and do the walkthrough of the 3D exhibition, they can look at it. And Crow Dancer, I think, is the name of that piece.
Yeah.
It's just stunning.
Thank you, Seth.
But that's one to look out for. Okay, Amy Lay, let's hear about a couple of your artworks in the exhibition.
Okay, this piece is titled Ursine, and it's a...
You get a little closer to the microphone?
Yeah, is that better?
Yep.
Okay, Ursine is a oil and charcoal on canvas. I think what I really was trying to convey in this piece is just subtle power, and sometimes it's hard for me to decide if the color should be the most powerful or the gestural drawing. So I tried to balance it in this one, and I felt like that crimson red sky with just a simple bear and the purpley kind of violet blues draw you away from the red. But I think the symbolism of this piece, you know, bears, for me, they're just a lot like us. And, you know, Ursine, you know, it's Latin, and the constellation, you know, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. I think bears sometimes they're a lot like us. And what do they ponder? And is it always just about us? But yeah, I had a lot of fun with this piece.
And Amy, you might be the most stylized out of the 5 artists in this show. We could argue that for sure. But, you know, this has a lot of abstract elements in it. Do you do those consciously? Do they kind of just present themselves?
Oh, gosh.
And what do your collectors say about your work that have those kind of elements?
Well, first, I think it just happens. I've really made an effort in the last few years to get away from reference material, from being so dependent on reference. And so I know I'll be doing a bear, but I don't know from there where it's going to go. And I've gotten almost addicted to that in my work because I don't want to know where it's going to go. And you know, my collectors seem to like that, and they seem to like that it gives me more movement within a piece than to be restricted by what I'm looking at and that I'm supposed to be drawing. So it gives me a lot of room for line, and line becomes wind, and then those lines can become other things. And I think for the viewer, it gives you a lot of freedom to interpret it the way you want it, I think.
Gotcha. And that would sound very scary to some artists.
Yeah, I know. I don't know.
But it's very freeing, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And I don't think now I would have a very hard time going back to more traditional work. It just keeps getting looser and looser for me.
Well, and as long as the collectors follow you, that's great, right?
Yeah, no, I feel very fortunate in that.
Okay. Amy Ringholz. Oh, I'm sorry, we got one more piece of Amy Lay's.
Okay.
What is it with you and mixing animals?
I know. That's happening more and more as well. I think besides the narrative and the possibility for narrative of different things coming together and working together, I like that. I think what happens is back to the line drawing. I'm very dependent on that with pencil and charcoal. And when I start drawing, for instance, a bear's shoulder, oh, look, there's a raven's wing, and there's his eye, and this could fit right in his, right under his chin. And that line is also that line, and it could be so many other animals. And growing up with all the wildlife I grew up with and drawing them as much as I did, all their lines are basically the same thing over and over. And so why not combine them and tell a little bit deeper of a story?
And what is the narrative here?
Well, I guess that's up to you. But for me,
you have to buy the book.
Yeah. I think of this very powerful, strong kind of brute of a bear. And what are those ravens telling that bear, or what is that bear telling those crafty ravens? I mean, and this piece too, I painted in the fall, and I think it was October, and it's a little macabre, little Edgar Allan Poe-ish. So it was just fun, and I like the challenge of why would a raven and a bear be doing that? I just think, why not?
Well, and is there any metaphorical social commentary about what's going on politically in our country in this one?
Well, it's definitely not social distancing there, but absolutely. I think there's always narrative for different people, different narrative for different people.
Okay. Kathy, most of the work in the exhibition is wildlife art, or at least animal-based, and we thought you made a great addition to the exhibition because you bring a little bit more traditional Western art and a little bit more of the traditional narrative, but these gorgeous landscapes in these paintings really offset the wildlife in the rest of the show to a really great degree. And tell me about what you're trying to capture when you're looking at these incredible mountainscapes and then having these figures to help give us some scale to understand what we're looking at.
Yes, this painting is titled Spirit of the West. This mountain is called Volcano Peak on the Utah-Nevada border. I saw it early one morning with the sunrise on it. And because of my bent for Western history, not only physical history and written history, but artistic history, I've taken an interest in Maynard Dixon since the mid-1970s. I've studied his work for years, seen every exhibition possible that I could get to. And Maynard had a wonderful knack of bringing the arid Western desert to life in his work. And when I saw this in real life, I couldn't help but think of his work. My approach to presenting these pieces is to try and bring the glory of the scene of the moment to other viewers. My study for this piece was an 8x10. This is 40x50. The study had an old broken down cattle loading chute in it. But instead of that, I painted some of the feral wild horses that we see in the Great Basin. I thought it added a bit of movement and intrigue to this scene, and it is something that you would typically see in the Great Basin.
And tell me about the title. I'm a sucker for a good title.
Yes, The Spirit of the West. I spend a lot of time between Nevada and Wyoming, and Nevada being almost all public land, you can wander as far and as long as you want. Same in Wyoming, at least Western Wyoming. So I spend a lot of time out there seeing what's going on and watching the wildlife and the domestic animals. So it means something to me to be there and see it. And then I try to interpret it for other viewers through my art.
Gotcha. Lindsay, if you could unscreen share for 1 minute, I want to throw in a quick slide here. Kathy, you haven't been to our museum, but that's our Maynard Dixon.
Yes, it's a spectacular one.
And it's only 8 by 18 feet.
Yeah. and when I've got every Maynard Dixon publication pretty much that I know of anyway. So I look at his work a lot. And when I see images like this, I've seen that more or less in the Great Basin and Arizona areas.
Well, one of the tragedies of us not getting together, which is a trivial thing compared to life and death, but I was looking forward to you seeing this painting and getting your reaction to it in person.
I've seen some of his big murals, the Kit Carson one that was in Cody.
Right.
They're very, very impressive.
Yeah, this one is the mate to that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to the pictures. Go to the next one. I love the title on this one too.
A little bit of a take on our modern society compared to historical ones. This scene I took from my cowboying experiences. A lot of the ranches here, of which there's a very few left, used to need help moving their cattle afoot there and horseback. And because I had horses and could ride, I got invited to help them. This is an early morning scene moving the Hereford Ranch cattle north of town against the morning light on the southern part of the Teton Range. And I did this many, many times, not only going north in the spring, but coming south in the fall. And so my interpretation of me being there ends up in this form for hopefully the public to enjoy. It is a part of history now. They no longer trail cattle north of town. There's too much traffic and people are in a big hurry, and so they don't do that anymore. I feel greatly appreciative of the chance to have lived it.
That would have been pretty cool to trail cattle down by the $1 Million Cowboy Bar. Last thing, a couple of your big pieces in the exhibition are inspired by Thomas Moran. And if you're going to live in that part of the world and paint landscapes, Moran is the Mac Daddy of everything, right?
Yes, Moran on his Yellowstone expedition with Hayden in 1871 did many studies, which I have studied intensively. And his large, important paintings were brought into Congress when people presented the national park idea, which was brand new in the world at the time. And his paintings were very influential to have the government decide to create a national park service entity in the country.
Gotcha. Catherine Turner, let's look at your pieces. So I don't remember seeing that in Jackson Hole.
Oh, it's, well, thank you for letting me include this piece because it makes me smile just to look at it.
Absolutely.
This piece is an older piece. It was, but it was such an important painting in my own growth as an artist that I wanted to talk about it here. At the time, I was doing sort of kind of an intensive study about birds. And that's because we were doing a group show with September and a couple of other artists that was benefiting a raptor rehabilitation center here in Jackson. And I learned so much in that study about birds. And I would go to this rehabilitation center and draw and paint the birds from life. And when that wasn't enough, I realized that still reference and photographs weren't going to cut it when it came to birds. And that's because birds never stop moving. They're always, I guess I've never seen a sleeping bird, but there's always a twitch. There's always a fast twitch. There's, they're in constant movement, which is, I think, why we're so enamored by them, and why there's so much sense of marvel and wonder about birds. and then the sense of flight. So in order to study their sense of flight, I would watch YouTube videos, and I'd slow it down. I'd slow down the frame speed so that I could study the mechanics of flight and how the wings actually worked. And so what I wanted to do with this piece is I wanted to express this sense that birds are always in movement, and this, how far can I push movement in my work? Because this painting set me on this course. Now when I paint any animals, I really try and include this sense of movement because of how important and essential that element is. So this is kind of this was a great teacher, this piece. The other reason that I wanted to show this piece is to talk about this rehabilitation center and talk about how in Jackson, there's one thing I think we share in our culture, and that is a deep love for the natural world and a care for it. And that's why we have these kind of rehabilitation centers, why we have a lot of conservation efforts for the trumpeter swan, and specifically, and for other species. And that's a age-old value that we all share, is this sense of wildlife conservation. And I hope, and I think I share it with the rest of the artists here, that maybe through art we can instill a deeper love for the magnificence of these animals, and instill in viewers maybe a connection with them that would instill a commitment to their conservation, especially in a place like Jackson, where the ecosystem is relatively still intact.
Absolutely. Very good point. And I know one that the others would agree with as well. And I must be part bird because I'm always moving around too.
I'll paint you and you'll look just like that swan,
yeah,
Seth.
that'd be great. I could just be a blur. That'd be great. And then tell us about this pronghorn.
So this is another painting that I love, and the reason that I wanted to talk about it is for two reasons. One is because I love painting pronghorns. They're a very, very special animal, and they're very, very much an icon and a symbol for me of the West. They're a unique species. They're unique in themselves. Their closest relative is the giraffe. They don't have any relatives in North America. They also don't have any predators that have survived them. So they're the fastest land animal in North America. So, and that's because they're completely adapted for these wide open spaces. They love these wide open spaces and need them just like artists do. I think they're very exotic looking. I love the contrast that they have. This is a buck with a dark cheek patch, and these are antlers that are part of their skull structure, so they don't shed them every year like antlers, like the ungulates do. But they're also, in this painting, I wanted to paint it in a way that is completely harmonious with its environment, with its background. So they live in the sage, wide open plains of the sage landscape. And so in this painting, the sage color just kind of envelops this pronghorn, and they're kind of one and the same. And I think the natural world can teach us so much about how to be in harmony with the landscape and how to live in harmony on the planet. I think that the more that we watch the species of the natural world, the more we can learn how to do that.
Absolutely. And that's a great point. Amy Ringholz, I think you're back with us. Pull your slides up and tell us a little bit about your pieces.
Thank you. I am back. I think while listening to these girls and all of the research and the time they spend with the animals, and growing up alongside them, watching them in the wild, just the time spent, it really shows in their work. It's beautiful. And I feel like what I try to do in my work is really go straight to the heart and the essence of what I'm looking at. So I feel like I'm drawing and painting a lot with my heart. And I hope that when you see my work, you feel the warmth of the love I have for these incredible creatures and the things they represent and symbolize. And I think what I love to do in these pieces, I use ink. I like to work quickly to create the motion and the emotion of the piece. And I use that ink out of a turkey baster, or I squeeze it out of a tube, and that way it's not.
Did you say a turkey baster?
Yeah, I use a turkey baster, or that little blue ball squeezy thing. And I draw like that, and I draw like that flat, and then I finish the piece with oil paintings on the canvas, on the easel. So I feel like I'm really going after, at first, there's a lightness to the work, there's expressionism, there's feeling, but then once you really study the eyes and the body positioning, you can really get into the depth of the painting. So I love that play between joy and this attraction to the depth and the heart.
And again, another great title.
Strolling.
Strolling.
Yes.
And
then this, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, whether it's that last piece or this one, how much, were you consciously thinking about Cubism when you kind of invented this style that you have, so to speak?
I guess back in the beginning in college, I would draw on the easel with ink. So you had like a little dropper, and the ink would move. It would drip down, drip to the side. And in that moment, I loved the freedom of the unknown of what would happen. And so Cubism has played a huge role in my work starting. And then as I evolve over the years, it comes and goes with whatever I'm working with.
But it was Cubism labeled after the fact of what was a mistake, is what you're saying, or a haphazard thing, right?
Yeah, a lot of my work has just come to be what it is on its own. I didn't really study under anybody. A little bit about this piece. Shield is a 60 by 40 on a wood panel. And what I've found with wood is it allows me to do different kinds of mark making than a canvas would allow. So I was a drawing major in school and have often searched for ways to continue to push line work and shading and value and expression through pencil. And so on this piece, I really used a bunch of different materials. There's wood stain in the background. There's some stain on the bison. I use a candle and the wax kind of in different places. I drew with the candle, and then the stain would resist from those marks, giving it some texture.
You going all grown up and encaustic on us.
I know, different things. And then I was kind of not moved by just having one single portrait in this piece. So I sketched in some charcoal, different animals in there with a fox and a coyote and a great horned owl. And then went in there with my ink. And this is like the perfect test of every artist's goal, which is to not overpaint or underpaint a painting. And I had to really let it breathe and let it stay alive. And so I really let the bison do the main conversation of the piece, and then let these sub conversations come in with these other animals. So altogether, I really felt like in this composition of movement around the bison was kind of like a shield-like pattern, and it really spoke to me that they all are together in trying to stay this ecosystem in which we love and that works together, and they're all one giant force to be loved and respected.
Very cool. Well, thank you, ladies, for sharing some insights into your art today. Maybe open everybody's mic. And Anybody want to jump in and say anything in general about the exhibition or about anything anybody wanted as far as parting comments? I want to give you guys the chance to say anything you haven't been asked about that you wanted to say. And just raise your hand and we'll go that way. How about that?
I am extremely honored to be in the show at the booth, a great important Western art museum, and I'm extremely honored to be joined by these four exceptional painters and artists, friends of mine. Thank you, Seth.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody? Yes, September.
Well, I'm going to mirror exactly what Kathy just said.
I wasn't fishing.
You're going to get them.
But we'll take them.
And it was wonderful to see the virtual tour because it's just exceptional. And it's a milestone in an artist's career to be part of an exhibit like this and such a venue as is the Booth Western Art Museum. And it's just, it's a huge honor. It's incredible, again, to not be part of this museum at this point in time with these incredible artists. I mean, I just couldn't be surrounded by more inspiring people, so artists. So it's huge. So thank you.
Thanks, September.
Well, and one of the things that I meant to mention at the beginning that we didn't was, we didn't set out to do a women's art show necessarily. That's where we wound up. We also wound up by coincidence on the 100-year anniversary of women getting the right to vote and women in Wyoming having 150 history with the right to vote. And when I was talking with Catherine Turner, and she was telling me about her pioneering grandmother, she did a big first. And I think you said you identified with that Liz Cheney quote about the grit, and that your family takes a lot of pride in being in Wyoming since almost that time when they got the right to vote. Is that correct?
We've been here for a while, not quite that long, but definitely part of that. And I want to jump in here and thank you, Seth, and your board for conceiving of this idea of highlighting the quality of the work that's happening in a little mountain town in Wyoming. So that's it just was interesting vision that you had, and we appreciate it. The fact that we are all women, I think, did lend a nice element to this that it took to pull this show together. We've been working together for over the past number of months, and it's really been it's a lot of teamwork that got art from Jackson Hole to Atlanta and Georgia, and that's because we work together, and that's, I think, how women work. But I leave this talk today, and definitely the experience of putting this show together, I think, inspired, and all of these women, I'm inspired by their work, and I'm inspired by the commitment to their work, and that's a long time coming, and that's what got us here, and I don't see that letting up anytime soon. So this show, I think, you can expect great work to continue from this group, because they're all in. They're all in. They work so hard, and that's where all these paintings came from. So I'm really grateful for their inspiration that I get to be surrounded by in this town.
Yes, this is not a retrospective type exhibition. You guys are all mid-career artists. Kathy Withfler, you too. And, this is, a halfway point or close to it for some of you. And even Ringholz, you still got 50 years to make art.
That's right. I think, what a beautiful thing that we get to do, that there is no end to this journey, and I feel like we'll never reach our potential as artists, and what a great thing that is. And to be able to continue our craft from young to old is just a gift and a pleasure, and it shapes our lives.
Well, there's a lot of analogies out there comparing golf and art, particularly plein air painting. And one of the things about golf is you never win. You know, you never have a perfect game. You never master it. You're always trying to get better. And I love that about you artists, that, you know, when asked what your favorite painting is, it was either the one you just finished or the one you're getting ready to start. And, you know, it's always trying to get better. Some, you know, thinking about the next 10 paintings that you got in your mind and knowing you may not have time to paint all the ones that are going to come to your mind in your lifetime. So it's that never-ending quest. And I thank you for having it. Amy Lay, you want the last word?
Well, sure. I just think that the artists you chose for this, I think our work complements each other. And that also is transcended with our personalities. And it's been a pleasure, you know, getting to know some of these ladies better and working with you and Lisa as well. And I'm just so honored and humbled by the whole thing. So thank you.
Well, and thank you for mentioning Lisa. I've been remiss in not mentioning her earlier, along with Nikki and Chris and Sam and Marion and Christy and all the folks in our curatorial department who put this show together. This really was Lisa's idea, so I'm here bogarting that
Nice.
because she doesn't like to do this. But thank you for joining us today. We've had a lot of fun. We're really enjoying having this show here. I'm so sorry that we didn't get to have you here when it was up so you could see it in person. Maybe that'll happen at the very end. Fingers crossed, we'll see. But this is the next best thing. And I thank you for being part of it, being with us today, Art for Lunch. And y'all stay safe, and we'll see you on the other side.
Thank you, Seth.
Thanks, Seth.
Bye for now.
Bye.